Hello and welcome to City Corner, an ongoing program where we talk with City Council and staff about what's happening in our city. I'm Michael Charbonneau. Well, when you think of services in the city, you think of public works, energy services, and police and fire. But another important service in the city is a proper development of our city. And that is accomplished through the Department of Development Services. Joining us today to talk about this is Development Services Director Kerwin Jensen. Welcome, Kerwin.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here.
Good. Well, so now you oversee 4 divisions in your department. That is building, planning, housing, and economic development. So let's talk about each of those, and we'll start right off with building. Building is basically ensuring that every building in the city fits certain codes and certain standards. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the main function of the building department is to make sure that our homes, our businesses, other places we frequent in the community, churches, schools, things of that nature are all safe. That is their primary purpose. In fact, there's at least a dozen, up to 15 different types of building inspections that are done for a typical single-family home, for example. And again, the primary purpose is to make sure the safety of that home for the residents of that home will be assured. They're not looking necessarily at the quality of work, but making sure the safety of the work is done throughout the whole construction process.
And where do these standards come from?
They come from the International Building Codes, which is a set of adopted codes that's adopted at the state level and then also adopted by local level. And so every few years these international building and safety codes are reviewed by a code council to look at updates that are required and that sort of thing. And so a big important part, for example, this year we've had a lot of snow. People have worried about the integrity of their roofs, and that's part of the building code is they have certain snow loads depending on which part of the country you're in, certain wind loads, things of that nature, so that they can sustain the types of weather for different areas of the country.
So that brings it to the question of, do we have certain specifics here for our area that are different than other areas? Or?
Ours is a fairly routine area here. We don't, we do have higher winds, but certainly not like what you're subject to in hurricane areas. For example, down in Florida and along the Gulf Coast, you're going to have what's known as hurricane clips and that sort of thing on your roofs and things like that. But no, there's nothing out of the ordinary here. The high winds that we sustain are typical of many areas across the country, and so we don't get a lot of snow here. We're not subject to great frequency of earthquakes or things like that, and so typically the standard building codes are what are required here.
So we have staff members that basically work with the builders and they go out and conduct these inspections during the whole process?
Yeah, so we have 4 building inspectors when we're at full staff, and again with a typical single-family house up to 15 different types of inspections, a dozen or more for commercial properties as well. So they're looking at things like the plumbing to make sure the plumbing's done appropriately, drywall or the sheetrock, the framing, in insulation inspection. I mean, that's important to make sure the proper amount of insulation is put in each of these homes. And then before any occupancy takes place, a builder or developer should have a final occupancy permit and final inspection done before occupancy is allowed from the general public.
Very good. The next division is planning, which basically sets the guidelines, I guess, for the building who do the inspectors. Tell me about planning and the importance of long-term planning.
Yeah, so planning and development division, it's to answer your question specifically, it's very important. The state of Washington is one of the fastest growing states in the country, and the Tri-Cities area is one of the fastest growing areas in the state of Washington. So we're moving right along here, and so it's important that we have the infrastructure in place to support all this population growth that is taking place. I mean, we're looking to make sure we have proper infrastructure as far as water and sewer goes, as far as parks go, and other amenities throughout the community. And it all starts with the planning division. When somebody wants to annex property into the city, we begin with the subdivision process, the zoning process, and and then that evolves into the building permits and things like that. But there's always standards that require certain acreage of parks, for example, for per population and that sort of thing, and we want to make sure we continue to invest in our community and have the infrastructure in place to make our city a very comfortable city and a city that everybody can enjoy living in.
And so basically, as part of the planning, we're making sure that building just doesn't haphazardly happen all over the place, which is the zoning aspect of it. How do we determine, what goes where as far as zoning goes? Yeah,
so there's a couple different ways there. The primary way is a comprehensive plan, which I like to describe as a should document. And as what I mean by that is a comprehensive plan. Once adopted, we should have commercial in these areas here. We should have residential in these areas here. And it's with the zoning that is incorporated after a comprehensive plan is adopted, that becomes what I call a shall document. Mm-hmm. That is then when the requirements are in place that this area shall be zoned and developed for residential purposes, and another area shall be zoned and developed for commercial purposes. And it's always important to not have certain uses, kind of like a library, for example. Mm-hmm. There's certain areas in a library where it's a quiet zone, and right. You shouldn't be boisterous and loud, and that's the same with zoning. There's certain areas where we shouldn't have industrial land right adjacent to residential uses, or even some commercial uses shouldn't be immediately adjacent to residential uses. And so that's done through the comprehensive plan process and then followed up by the zoning process. And all of this is done, especially at the comprehensive plan level, is done with public meetings, public hearings, and input from the entire community. And we actually went through our 10-year comprehensive plan review about a year and a half ago, and have a new one that was adopted by the council about a year and a half ago.
And so for citizens' knowledge, then the planning of their city is with their input. Planning Commission is a volunteer committee. So I guess that's just what I'm trying to ask is, who determines what zone is what? So it basically boils down to the citizens and the input of everything. This is what we want our city to look like, and this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, it all starts with the citizens and input from the citizens, and then it goes on through the Planning Commission and then on to the City Council for final adoption of not only the comprehensive plan, but also any zone changes that take place in our development codes.
So recently, I guess it's been a few years now, but the city changed over to a hearing examiner process for, I guess, zone changes and other what you call quasi-judicial things. Explain to me what the hearing examiner works and how that's been working for the city.
Yeah, so there's kind of three different areas, primary areas, that the hearing examiner works with. And the hearing examiner, rather than many communities having an advisory board review this is one individual that is not an employee of the city. Typically is someone who is an expert in land use law, perhaps is an attorney, and we have one hearing examiner that comes to our community once a month, and the three different areas that they primarily are involved with would be zone changes, subdivisions, and special use permits. And a zone change, for example, is where somebody wants to change their property from single-family zoning to maybe multi-family and allow them to put apartments in a neighborhood versus single-family homes. Subdivision is obvious. That would be subdividing the land for future houses. And then a special use permit would be something that may or may not be allowed in an area depending on the location of town, but might be best allowed if there's certain conditions like hours of operation or where a driveway or drive-through service should be located. Those are certain conditions that may be imposed on certain types of uses. So those are kind of the three areas, primary areas that the hearing examiner works with. And we have an excellent hearing examiner at the present time. He conducts public hearings in a very fair fashion. He allows citizen input, ample citizen input, and he's very fair, he's very courteous, and just does an outstanding job, while all at the same time making sure that we're complying with the standards that are in our zoning code.
You know, and we televise the hearing examiner meetings here on City View, and that's one thing I've noticed about that. It may not be the most visually stunning meeting to watch, but the whole temper of the meeting is such that it's a very, very fair process. So what is the advantage of this hearing examiner as far as, you know, as far as when the final decisions are made?
Yeah, the big advantage is because this individual comes with a land use law background, they know exactly, and in our case, the gentleman that takes care of that for us, he knows exactly what laws need to be implemented and what decisions can be made without creating a bias or a decision that cannot be supported or backed up by law. And as a result, we've not been legally challenged on any of his decisions, to my knowledge, since we've implemented that program.
So it basically protects the city from,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And in many cases, on some of the items he reviews, he's advisory to the city council, and then in certain instances, he is the final authority on those decisions that are made.
Good. So another division that you oversee is something that a lot of citizens may not be aware of as far as programs that we offer, but it's the housing division. And explain a little bit more to me about what the housing division does and some of the programs we offer.
Yeah, so there's kind of two different components to the housing division. The Community Development Block Grant Program, or many times it's referred to as the acronym CDBG. And that's when we're able to bring in federal funds from the Department of Housing and implement programs in our low to moderate income neighborhoods. And that can be, typically the areas you see are for park improvements, improvements in our parks. Or it could also be for accessibility standards, for example, sidewalks or accessible ramps, even the pedestrian signals, pedestrian activated signals, the pedestrian activated crosswalks, things of that nature. In low to moderate income areas, we receive federal funding that can be utilized in these neighborhoods throughout the community. And so it's a great program. Sometimes people are concerned with utilizing federal funds like that. The thing you need to remember is that if we don't utilize our allotment in our community, somebody else will utilize that funding somewhere else. So we really should take advantage of those opportunities in our community and improve and enhance our community. So that's one component of the housing and grant programs that we administer. The other is through what's called the home program, and these are more for individual homeowners, for again low to moderate income families, where down payment assistance can be provided for first-time home buyers, and also funding available to do improvements in a home that might be older and needs some updating. Again, not cosmetic reasons, but for safety purposes to upgrade a home. And the best way to get knowledge of those funding opportunities is to come into our department and speak with the proper individuals in our department to help out with that. But the down payment assistance program is a very important one for homeowners, rental assistance, things of those natures. Also with the Community Development Block Grant Program, the one that I spoke of earlier, that's a very important program for certain events and things that take place in our community, such as Meals on Wheels, that helps fund that, and other programs, Elijah Homes, some of the efforts they do, to give you an example of where those funds are made available.
So I guess the best takeaway for that is these programs are there to help keep our property values up, eliminate community blight, the rental assistance and stuff like that, is so citizens have safe, decent places to live.
And occupy all the homes in the community, yes, with nice looking properties.
So we have some rehabilitation programs as part of that, and I think that's important for our citizens to know about. And how do they go about finding out the information on the rehabilitation?
Yeah, so there's information on the website. If you get in and Google these types of programs, again, probably City of Richland Home Program, capital H, capital O, capital M, capital E, Home Program. Or just come down to the Development Services Building on Northgate, and we can help you out with those questions as well.
Okay, good. Last part division in your department is economic development. Talk a little bit about that and the importance of economic development for the growth of our city.
Yeah, and that's very important to any community, is that we have good economic growth throughout the community. That can be in the form of of new homes and home building taking place, construction activities. It can be in the form of retail, which is one thing that most people kind of look at and see all the retail work that's going on throughout the community. But a big part of it is job creation. And that's a lot of the industrial land we have that the city owns on the north end of our community out in the Horn Rapids area. And that's an area of town that a lot of people don't drive out to unless you're employed out there. But that's a huge employment base, and that's a very important area for primary sector jobs, is that North Richland area where we employ thousands and thousands of people up there in our industrial lands, and that's an important component of economic development as well.
Is that unique for a city to own big chunks of land?
Yeah, in my experience, that's very, very unique. I'm sure there are a number of cities throughout the country that own property, but we own thousands of acres. The city of Richland does, and most of it's our industrial properties north of town, but we also own commercial and residential areas scattered throughout, vacant parcels. For example, the current site we're sitting on today, the current City Hall site, will be made available in the near future for economic development purposes, and we want something very nice and very creative coming downtown, and so this area will be looked at as a very fine economic development opportunity downtown.
And so you kind of see that cycle on planning is say this is where we want to zone it, what we want to do, economic development, we have this available, let's bring this in, and all that. And all that is for, you know, going back to when we have discussions about, you know, funding for the city, the three-legged stool and all that. So explain that a little bit more to me about, you know, why is the city involved with trying to bring economic development? Because it is the funding sources, the tax purposes that we're able to benefit citizens.
Yeah, so we rely largely on property and sales tax, and so it's very important that we have development taking place and also retail sales. And it's important for all of the communities in the Tri-Cities area. Just because Kennewick might get a retailer that we would like to have had in Richland, that's good for the entire Tri-Cities, just as much as it is if we land a nice retail user here in Richland. It's great for all of the Tri-Cities, and we do work very, very well together. And so it just becomes more and more important for a community when we're trying to draw more activity, more development here in town. It's very important. Business retention is something that people don't think a lot of. But before new businesses will look at investing in a new community, they will actually look at the existing businesses and see how long they've been in a community. If there's frequent turnover, a lot of times they don't want to invest in that community because there's a level of uncertainty there. And so it's very important, not only do we cater to new businesses coming to town, but also through our business retention efforts, we keep those businesses for long periods of time in our community as well.
And that does lead me to my next question, which is the importance of keeping, you know, small businesses, which usually is what we're talking about, you know, active. So what do we offer as far as business retention? I know we have a couple of business districts and things of that nature. We do the small business programs. Explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, and maybe what you're referring to there, Small Business Saturday, is
Right,
something we
right.
help out with, which is the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and trying to assist particularly the Uptown and the Parkway district, which are our two business improvement districts. We all know the Parkway and the Uptown have been with this community since day one, and they're very, very important for our community. It's just fun to come and shop in these places. We all know what it's like to go to the mall, but it's fun to come and shop at the Parkway and the Uptown as well.
We have much better food at the Parkway than the mall.
Food and unique businesses, and it's just an enjoyable atmosphere. And some of the programs that are available through the Economic Development Department can enhance those areas. For example, each year for the past many, many years, the Uptown has been sponsoring a chalk art event. And through business license funding that we receive, tax funding that we receive from in the city, we're able to enhance that opportunity. Same with the murals that have been painted in the Uptown area. And there's all sorts of programs available for facade improvements. If a business wants to spruce up the entrance or the facade of their property, there's funding available to assist with those things there. And so there's a number of important programs available. And we like to focus on our downtown areas. We want to really build up our central business district, the area near the river. We want to bring people to the downtown area, draw them to the river. And so we really want to enhance the businesses that are located in the downtown areas, the older areas, the areas that do need a little bit more assistance than some of the newer shopping centers.
Let's talk about some of the areas and you know what we're doing as a city to, you know, focus on that. You talked downtown, the Swift Corridor is what we're referring to. Tell me about what's happening in the Swift Corridor. You touched on the fact that, you know, the old City Hall will be repurposed, but tell me about the Swift Corridor and some of the plans.
Yeah, so we have, you know, Cadillac, for example, invested millions and millions of dollars a few years ago to add on to their building over there and
right.
improve that site there. And so they're kind of an anchor on the west side of the Swift Corridor. And the anchor on the other end would be this site here, the current
right.
City Hall site, the fire station, that area there. But in between, we're building the new City Hall building. We've had Columbia Basin College invest in this Swift Corridor area, and we want to make this just a very walkable area. I was amazed. One day I decided to go out and walk all the way from Cadillac to the river, and it took only about 10 minutes to walk that distance. And so we want people that work in these employment areas downtown and the medical areas to realize that, hey, there's a river not too far from here. And on the way, there's going to be some nice eateries, perhaps to eat at or areas to stop at. And we want to be able to connect so that there's a fluid connection, so to speak, so that people can walk from A to B and find themselves along the river and just have an enjoyable experience. And part of that will be improving the Swift Corridor. We're going to add some bike lanes to Swift Corridor, some trees to enhance that area. And also we're looking at ways in the future to perhaps slow down the traffic on George Washington Way so that we can allow pedestrians a better opportunity of crossing George Washington to gain access to the river.
So all of that to keep our downtown, you know, vibrant, rather than some communities where they just head out and then the downtown just dies.
Yeah, we want to keep a very high level of vibrancy in our downtown area.
Columbia Point, you talked about the river. That's pretty much, and it's amazing because when I've been here with the city now for 20 years, Columbia Point had just barely started 20 years ago. Now look at it. There's only a couple pieces of property left to develop. Explain that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't understand that Columbia Point, which is the area down where Anthony's is located, the Courtyard by Marriott, that's the area of town we're talking about, the area including the Winco Shopping Center. There, the majority of that property was owned by the city and has been sold for commercial development and also residential development. And we only have a few parcels left that are vacant down there, and we are continuing to work with developers to develop those vacant properties to, again, make that a nice experience for families. And those, you know, we have an outstanding bike trail along the Columbia River that stretches all the way from Columbia Point, even Columbia Point South, all the way north up to Leslie Groves Park, and it's just a great opportunity to get out with the family and enjoy our beautiful weather. And we want areas where along the way that people can stop and eat at a restaurant perhaps, or get an ice cream cone and enjoy those sorts of opportunities as well. And so we're continuing to build on that theme for Columbia Point, and you'll continue to see improvements take place in that area.
Farther north, you talked about it a little bit earlier, the DOE released a huge amount of land to Richland and to the Port of Benton for development. What do we want to see happen out there?
Yeah, so this is the area way up north, north of Horn Rapids Road. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, from the Department of Energy, the community received about 1,600 acres from the Department of Energy. 300 acres went to Energy Northwest, and then the remainder was split roughly in half between the Port of Benton, which is one of our economic development partners, and the other half went to the city of Richland. Areas south of Horn Rapids, we're marketing that for smaller developments, 1 acre lots, 5 acre lots, that sort of thing. But this recently acquired Department of Energy land we want that to be reserved for users that need large lots. And when we say we don't have a definitive number there, but we're looking, somebody that needs 150 acres, 200 acres at a time for their use. We don't want to carve this up into a bunch of small 20s or 50-acre parcels. And of course, we don't have the infrastructure in place yet. We're in the midst of planning that, but these are going to be large users that will bring perhaps hundreds and hundreds of employees to the region, and that's what we're looking and how we're looking at marketing that newly acquired Department of Energy land.
That family wage job that they talk about all the time.
Yeah, and that's an important thing, as Hanford kind of ebbs and flows with the funding that's available out there for cleanup efforts. We want to continue to sustain ourselves and maintain the area for employment.
And then finally, let's look across the other side of the Yakima River at South Richland and even out there in Badger Mountain. What's the goal in those areas?
Yeah, so Badger Mountain South, way out south by Interstate 82, that continues to grow real rapidly out there. If you haven't been out there for 6 months even, or 12 months, drive out there and take a look. There's dozens and dozens of new homes, and that's way on the south end of our community. Also down in South Richland, the Department of Natural Resources owns about 350 acres that's currently an orchard just west of Target, and they will be selling that here in the near future. And that has been master planned, again, through our comprehensive plan efforts, to be a mixture of single and multifamily housing and commercial, with also a school site identified out in that area there. So those are some of the areas you'll see over the next few years continue to grow in the South Richland area.
But all this has been master planned out and through the comprehensive plan and all that. So, I mean, there's a, I don't know if this is the right thing, but there's a method to the madness, so to speak.
Yeah, and in the state of Washington, it all starts with the growth boundary that we have, and that is where urban-like growth needs to be contained within a certain boundary. And so I know, some folks get a little concerned that the vacant lot next door to them, or the 5 acres that's been open space for years and years, is now being developed. But that is where development should be taking place, is in this urban core, in this urban growth boundary. And so all of these areas we've spoken about today are in the urban growth boundary, and we are really discouraged in the state of Washington from developing outside the urban growth boundary. And so that's what we're doing, is trying to contain that growth to the area within the urban growth boundary, and that's exactly what we're doing here in the city of Richland.
And then finally, what would you like citizens to know about your Development Services Department? Yeah,
it's great working with the department that works with the development community, because this is just an outstanding area of the state of Washington to live in. We have very, very low crime rates. We have great parks. We have great weather. The employment base is outstanding here, and that's why you're seeing such an influx of people wanting to live in the Tri-Cities or wanting to live in Richland. It's just a great area to be. It's a great community to be a part of, and I enjoy working with the citizens of our community in moving the city of Richland forward in the future.
Perfect way to end this program. So I would like to thank Kerwin Jensen for being on this program and talking to us about development services. And if you have any questions, probably the best place to start is from the city's website. I want to thank you for watching this edition of City Corner, and we'll see you next time.
You're watching CityView TV, your Richland community connection.